Hey there folks, my name is Cypher, Ace Combat Autist, Masochist, and Wizzo Waifu Enthusiast, and today I'm bringing you 2020's Game of the Year, no question about it. A game that's so Ace Combat that it's at least 25% more Ace Combat than some Ace Combats. That's a whole lot of Ace Combat per combat. Hey guys, does anyone else smell toast? Project Wingstop is an Ace Combat love letter 3 years in the making. It was developed by a handful of Australian guys hooked directly into IV drips filled with toxic heavy metals and meth, a dog for moral support, and a half dozen Windows 98 computers powered by ostriches on giant hamster wheels. It's fully voiced by at least 2 people for sure, maybe 3, but that's just a rumor and I don't know if it's true. And it's about as finely polished as the 200-year-old spoon I dug up that one time in Stardew. The entire game feels like someone played Ace Combat Zero and said, this isn't batshit insane enough for me, let's do drugs about it. This game is, at face value, an Ace Combat clone. It does its own thing, sure, but when the controls, quotes on the radio, gameplay, and even radar icons are nearly identical, I'm pretty sure you can safely call it a clone. That's not necessarily a bad thing, though. I'm always looking for a new dose of Ace Combat. This game strays just far enough from the Ace Combat recipe to feel fresh and new, while sticking with it close enough that at times while playing I forgot it wasn't actually an official Ace Combat game. And that's the insane thing to me. This game was created and brought to market in under half the time it took for Project Aces to remember what number comes after 6. This is a crowd-funded indie game with a short production time with very little voice acting budget, that somehow manages to fool me into thinking it's a AAA release. That's absolutely crazy. The story sees you, Monarch, flight lead of the Hitman Squadron of the Sicario Mercenary Company, become involved in a civil war in a post-apocalyptic western and midwestern United States. More than 100 years ago, a series of earthquakes and tectonic plates collapsing split the world's countries into pieces. It's not all bad news though, because California sinks into the ocean and becomes a barren hellscape. Silver linings, you know? Anyhow, you fight for the rebellion against the quote-unquote Federation, which is a subtle nod to the Ocean Federation in Ace Combat canon, and in a roundabout way, a nod to the United Nations. Anywho, one thing leads to another and you're the top ace in the world all of a sudden, dropping bombs left and right and putting the Fed boys into the forever boxes wherever you go. In classic Ace Combat fashion, you piss off a crazed group of nutjobs about halfway through the game who take it upon themselves to personally nuke the tectonic plates with magic energy weapons that sets off the Apocalypse Part 2, possibly making the death toll of this game's war several times that of every Ace Combat game combined. You finally win the war via playing a 3D air combat version of Tohu with Captain Edge Lord McPixieface, and then the game ends with a rousing chorus of All My Friends Are Dead by Lil Uzi. The game fades to black with an ominous message stating you've received payment for a completed contract with the rebellion. Also, by the way, all of your friends are not dead, just most of them, but you have to read to find that out, and everyone knows I can't read. There's a secondary game mode called Conquest that is essentially Operation Katina from Ace Combat 5, but with a roguelike aspect and a lot more variation in the missions. You can hire mercenaries and even buy aerial battleships to fight for you, and your aircraft purchases actually carry over to your next playthrough, although nothing else you buy does. It's a little buggy at times, but otherwise a great addition to the game that leaves me wanting more way better than Ace Combat 7's multiplayer does. Now let's get the messy parts out of the way. No, this game isn't perfect. Even Ace Combat 7 isn't perfect, and it had many times the budget this game had. Even at this game's gentle to the wallet price range of $25, and even with how good I think this game is for that price, those flaws should be pointed out for the sake of an honest review. The developers need to be informed of their game's issues so that they can be fixed so that the game gets better as a whole. The good news is most of the flaws in this game aren't with the core game design. Well, aside from, as Oboshoes mentions in his much better review of this game, the developer's obsession with the color orange. The movement is fluid, snappy, responsive, the controls are intuitive, the gameplay is literally just Ace Combat on meth with an extra dose of sadism. Most of this game's problems are minor issues. So let's start off with sound problems. On no less than 2 occasions in the middle of a battle, especially in the larger missions, I noticed music cutting in and out and restarting at times. It created this weird audio popping and noise, to the point where I had to turn off what is otherwise a stellar soundtrack. Since we're already on the topic of sound, I also feel like I should mention some of the sound design does feel a little weak. You have a weird dissonance of bassy explosions from bombs, glass shattering as you fly by a blown up aircraft, and that perfect sound miniguns make that sounds like someone dropped a fork in a garbage disposal. Meanwhile, you've also got guns that are supposed to be heavy cannons sounding like someone flopping their cock against the microphone. It's a little underwhelming equipping a high explosive launching heavy gun pod or the main guns on the Frogfoot and hearing this. Tighten up on your audio sector, D2. A lot of the missions in-game have a long, awkward pause before the mission complete message pops up, and you kinda just awkwardly fly around waiting for the fade out. I assume this is so any radio message that pops up late won't get cut off by the fade out, but at the same time I also noticed at least one instance of a critical radio message being cut off by the fade to black anyway. It's a bit odd and would be worth polishing up. The game could also do with some forced action, like a timer for a few missions that makes the game less easy to just mop everything on the map. A bunch of reinforcements popping up mid-mission is a lot less stressful if you have all the time in the world to deal with them. Less critical, but still important in my opinion, is that the game could really do with some Ace Combat style mission start cutscenes. Nothing fancy like the full motion captured cutscenes or anything like that, but hell, even something like Ace Combat 5 where you get that sweet zoom in on a bunker or something and get those hammering drum beats and hear voices chattering about the battle just before it starts would be great. Mayhem from Ace Combat 0 is a perfect example of that style of cutscene in use. Hearing the panic in your allies as they all but lose a battle just before you show up and turn the round table into a killing floor really sets an intense tone for that mission. In Wingman's case, it would build hype and cut out some of the tediousness of every mission, starting out with the action movie style black bars and big white text on screen telling you the mission names. I know that's asking a lot. If this game never got this particular feature, it won't be any worse for it, but that's just a suggestion. Anyway, I never got to try the VR mode because I'm mega ultra poor and keep spending my money on single boxes of 5.56 and thigh-high wearing femboys on the internet, so my only experience with the game was a mostly stable playthrough or 3 in the standard mode. Oboe Shoes reported some frame drops while playing, but I'm running a 2060 KO and a later gen i5 processor, which I think is slightly more powerful than his system, I'm not sure. Also, I only play at 1080p because, like I said, mega poor, so that could be why. If there were any frame drops, I didn't notice them, although I did notice 1 or 2 instances of just a little bit of input lag. Never enough to break my immersion or cause me to rage quit or anything, but just enough that when I went to launch a missile or fire guns, I felt just a hint of a delay before the response. This is incredibly nitpicky and could be due to the controller I'm using being some off-brand piece of shit from Rock Candy. It only happened like twice in the 15 hours I put into this game before starting this review, but I didn't notice anything like that in Ace Combat 7, so it's worth mentioning. It's not a huge deal. It basically resulted in me going, huh, weird, and just continuing my game. However, my ultra-autistic 18 years of Ace Combat honed fingers can feel a disturbance in the force as low as 1 nanosecond. You can't slip anything by my fat little touch stubs. As for actual bugs, I didn't notice a ton of issues, however there were some pretty glaring small ones. In Conquest mode, I sometimes found myself spawning in facing the ground or a mountain and dying just before the fade-in finished. Being as Conquest mode restarts entirely every time you die, I got so frustrated I just straight up walked away from my computer for 2 days and missed my chance to put out a review on the first few days of this game being out. I also noticed that in some missions in Conquest mode, after you finish the main objectives, the game will spawn a boss fight. Killing the bosses will sometimes soft lock the game, and no matter how many enemies you destroy, you're just stuck flying around doing nothing until you kill yourself and start the whole conquest over. Some other bugs also come to mind, like how at one point late in the story missions, I noticed a truck retreating off in the distance. I charged after it and launched a volley of missiles only to realize the truck had driven through a mountain and was now underneath the terrain and untouchable. This isn't a huge deal in my instance, it just meant that I didn't kill everything on the map. But if it were to happen to a mission critical target or something, it would essentially be a soft lock, so you'd have to restart the whole mission. Speaking of restarting the mission, checkpoints. This game really needs some for some missions. I understand wanting to go back to the old days of Ace Combat where dying means redoing the entire mission. Problem is, some of the missions in this game are up to 30 minutes long, with multiple phases and boss fights near the end. There's nothing worse than the feeling you get when you've been fighting through a mission for a half hour and get thrown into a boss battle at the very end of the mission with less than 10% health, die, and have to replay the entire mission over again. One mission specifically that comes to mind, I was playing Mercenary Difficulty, doing a mission where you destroy an oil rig in a research facility, and I managed to scrape by with 5 health points left, when Frost launched out of the rig and started her boss battle. I got pinged by a stray machine gun burst and died instantly, and lost more than 30 minutes of careful, tedious progress. Yeah. This game needs to have a checkpoint implemented before any boss battle begins. Not necessarily in every single mission like Ace Combat 7 does, because too many checkpoints and the game will become far too easy. None at all though, and you just end up with a game that at times becomes so frustrating to play, it can make a Dark Souls vet sweat. On the topic of boss battles, this game has some really good ones and some really bad ones. An example of great boss fights include the final battle with Frost over Rosedower Base, with her mercenary escorts fighting alongside her. Taking out her mercenary escorts while dodging her spam attacks and then turning in to light her up, burning through her health bar, was incredibly satisfying, and watching her plane smash into the earth made me feel a little bit better about myself. On the opposite end of the spectrum, we have the final boss. By the way, this doesn't appear to be an uncommon opinion if you go to the spoiler threads on the Project Wingman subreddit. The final boss sucks big fat nuts. Big nuts all up in his mouth. The concept is cool as hell, but it's severely flawed. First of all, it's a 3-phase fight with a secret 4th phase. Each phase takes more than 6 hits with standard missiles to get through, and the combat progressed from the boss spamming missiles, to spamming railguns that leave a trail that damages you, to spamming missiles, railguns, and giant force fields of death, affectionately referred to online as bullshit balls, and omnidirectional railgun laser grids. Okay, that's fine, I can handle that, I thought to myself as I went in on hard difficulty on my first playthrough with my F4 Phantom. You can imagine my surprise when I finally got the last missile in, got the destroyed pop-up for the last phase, and the boss kept on fighting. Not only did he keep on fighting, he got faster and more violent, and my HUD was forcibly turned off in third person. The problem here isn't that there's a fourth phase. It's that by this time, if you're playing this the first time through, you're probably at low health. Turning off all the assists for the player could be incredibly cinematic, but when the rest of the boss fight has taken half an hour of your life away, and you finally get to this final phase low on health, your aircraft one stiff breeze from total combustion, and your fingers sore from doing bullshit acrobatics the likes of which Mobius 1 himself could never accomplish in an F4 Phantom, kinda sours the whole experience. Not just the experience of the fight, but of the whole game leading up to this point. Up until now, the game had been mostly fair, if a bit unforgiving, but this isn't a solo wing pixie style final phase either, where one head-on hit finishes the fight. No, this is a fourth health bar. It takes another half dozen shots to take him down, and even if you're like me and quite good at Ace Combat style games, finishing that fight without losing that last sliver of health is more luck than skill. This fight needs a little reworking, at least for the higher difficulties. I never played any of the lower difficulties, but I can't really imagine it being much easier. I don't think a checkpoint before the final phase would be a good idea, but something definitely needs to be done. My suggestion to the devs is to reduce the boss health entirely. Make every phase a 3 or 4 hit kill, and make the final phase take one special weapon or 2 standard weapons. At least give the player a health refresh before the final phase, if nothing else. You can even leave the HUD turned off, cause it looks cool. My issue isn't that the game is difficult, I actually quite like having a challenging Ace Combat clone for once. But there comes a point where the game just feels like it isn't being fair. The final boss would be hard enough on Mercenary mode if you only needed 2 missiles per phase. 6 to 9 hits is just absurd. Every other enemy in the game, including Frost, goes down with a good long burst of machine guns, and the Frost fight doesn't leave me feeling like it wasn't hard enough. I'm not saying you have to make the fight with Crimson 1 as easy as the fight with Frost, but good lord, turn down the boss health just a little, please. Now that that's all out of the way, I want to talk about good things. Despite not having any animated cutscenes beyond maps in the briefing screen for what I assume are budget reasons, and having very little character development at all, in-game or out, and having a number of voice actors that could probably be counted on one hand, I actually felt a spark of connection to the characters. The way they treat you, react to situations, and argue with each other over petty shit is great. Having a totally optional character, Prez, that only pops up if you fly a twin-seat aircraft is an incredible idea. Whoever decided that the game needed a fully voiced weapons systems officer should get a raise. It ever so slightly changes dialogue in nearly every mission and adds a little bit of replayability to a game that was already pretty replayable. I mean, we're talking about a game with a half dozen handicap options you can add to just make the game harder if you want to, 2 gameplay modes, more than a dozen aircraft, hundreds of weapon combos, and potentially more stuff on the way. And despite some of the bullshit moments, it felt good to have a flight arcade game that finally, after all my 18 years of being an Ace Combat fan, really and truly challenged me at every other turn. Enemy missiles track you better than in Ace Combat. AA guns are actually a threat. The enemy AI is almost scarily good. There were times when I would overshoot a normal enemy AI and get peppered with machine gun rounds for my mistake. They will also gang up on you and chase you relentlessly. Almost too relentlessly. They'll ignore your friendly AI at times just to add to the already massive amounts of missiles being launched at you. The AI also has a reaction time almost as good as a pro Ace Combat player, and sometimes they'll actually punish you for underestimating them. Like I said earlier, they will use their guns on you, and they don't feel bad about outturning your perfectly timed missiles either. In the past, I once complained about the AI in the Wingman demo being too perfect. They would constantly outturn every missile without letting up. Ace Combat is perfected having AI make mistakes. After a hard turn, even aces in the Ace Combat series will let up and have a bit of a delay before starting a new maneuver. Project Wingman's AI does this, but the harder the difficulty, the shorter that little bit of time hesitating gets. So instead of ending up with enemies that fly straight without dodging your missiles like you sometimes get in Ace Combat 7, even a low-tier MiG-21 moron AI in this game won't let you just murder them. They will make you work for it. With a little polishing, this game could get ascended to the level of the Holy Trinity in Ace Combat 7 for me. It's nearly perfect. It's a game that feels like Ace Combat to play, yet actually makes me work. Sign me the fuck up. The music, when it actually works, is fantastic. The music isn't quite Keiki Kobayashi tier, but it's damn close in my opinion. Jose Pavley hit an absolutely massive home run on this soundtrack, and every song fits in well with the tone of the game. There's even some callbacks to Ace Combat in at least one song, and probably more. Specifically, there's a hint of the intro to Megalith from Ace Combat 4 in the final boss battle theme, Kings. Absolutely stunning. Whatever D2 paid Jose for this project, it was money well spent. Hell, give the man a raise, he absolutely earned it. As for customization, there's a good selection of aircraft, and all of them can take multiple special weapons. Oh, but D2 was not content to just outdo the entire Ace Combat franchise by upping the kabooms per second by 3 times. No, 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 no. D2 cranked it up to 11. Wing-mounted shotguns, multiple wing-mounted Gatling guns, multi-lock air-to-air missiles that can have up to like 9 fired at once, railguns that explode on impact and leave a laser trail that damages enemies, a methed-up version of the ADMM from Ace Combat 6, triple-release bombs that you can mount on every hardpoint so that you can single-handedly reenact Dresden in a single fighter jet. This game has it all and then some. There's enough weapon variety that you'll never get bored, and you'll constantly be changing out aircraft just to see what new combos you can come up with. As for the story, it's surprisingly unforgettable and feels way more well thought out than it has any right to be. It just goes to show that an interesting concept backed by great game and sound design will take you farther than a 100-hour fleshed out story with 100 years of lore behind it, yet no interesting game mechanics to back it up. Looking at you, Dragon Age Inquisitions. I described this to a friend as a post-apocalyptic Ace Combat game, and that somehow fails to do it justice. The writer somehow managed to make a story with a darker, more adult tone than its inspiration, which is surprising because Ace Combat was already incredibly dark at times. The idea of the tectonic plates collapsing, causing an apocalypse that destroys all of civilization, is one I've never really heard before in any other form of media, and the plot reigniting that apocalypse over 100 years later while humanity is beginning to rebuild, just to gain an upper hand in a petty war over land and resources, it gives me some major Fallout vibes. That, along with the fact that the game takes place in a world that almost doesn't acknowledge any of this, a world that just keeps going no matter what the people who live on it do, is kind of beautiful in a weird, dark, cyclic Hindu Avatar: The Last Airbender bullshit kind of way. Fighting giant airships in areas where the earth is literally ripped open like a gaping wound, barreling through pre-apocalyptic cities with buildings that are very clearly on the verge of collapse, chasing fighters over massive wildfires that totally weren't implemented due to PTSD caused by the 2020 Australian apocalypse fires, turn fighting with aces in clouds of dust and ash while sickly yellow lightning pops and shakes your plane, all while you're watching places you've come to recognize get disfigured by slow creeping tidal waves of lava and ash. All of this makes Project Wingman stand out not as a clone, but an Ace Combat-inspired project that isn't afraid to run wild with its insane ideas. And as a result, this makes it a really unforgettable experience. How a small team managed to create a game that to me is worth far more than the asking price is beyond me. This game has only left me wanting one thing, and that thing is more. Anyway, the best part is they're not done yet. The devs proclaim that despite their initial success, and by success I do mean success, they won't be sitting on their hands ignoring the game's flaws. I guarantee that most, if not all, of my complaints will be addressed sooner rather than later with updates. This game literally just came out after all. In fact, not even an hour after I finished writing the script, a new update came out that was full of bug fixes. Let's be honest though, it's the year 2020 and a game just came out that is good enough without a day one patch to play and enjoy. That really is a breath of fresh air. I give this game a 6 wing-mounted shotguns out of 3 repetitions of Dip telling the main bad guy to shut the hell up. Buy it for the love of the Dust Mother and all things ashy and red. If you like Ace Combat, buy it. And leave a review on the Steam page. Recommend it to friends. Buy it for your mom. I don't care. I want this game to take off like a rocket so we can potentially get some DLC and a sequel. Thanks for watching. Look at this smug little asshole. Fuck you, bitch.